Thank you so much, Johannes. What a guy. So, you all are an integral part of this performance and event on the stage tonight. We have some wonderful guests, but you all are on the radio as well. So I just want to get a little bit of a warm-up going. Can we get a little bit of crowd noise and applause going just to see? We got to pick that up on the radio. Oh, that's sounding good. All right, I think you all are going to have it down pat. Before we get going, we've got roughly a minute and 15 seconds left before the 11 o'clock hour begins, and I just want to have everyone note that we will be having our Rooted in Community celebration for 2026 on February 28th. So I want everyone to mark their calendar. It's going to be a great event to benefit our new endowment, the Founders, the Beat Goes On Founders Fund. We're hoping to sustain independent media for years to come, so we hope you all will mark your calendars for that. And I just want to let you know, we are 45 seconds away from the live show. Carrie's getting excited, I can tell. All right, so everyone, if there's any last bathroom trips, you've got 30 seconds. Get back to your seats after that. And the anticipation is killing.
Stop it. You know that drives me crazy.
All right, 15 seconds, folks. I want to highlight our great volunteers who are working today, by the way. We got Mr. Paul and Allie on the bar and the door. 5 seconds till showtime. Everybody start getting that applause going. Woo! You are tuned to WSLR LP 96.5 FM in Sarasota and WBPV LP 100.1 FM in Bradenton. The opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect WSLR, its staff, or volunteers. You are here coming to you live from Fogartyville Community Media and Arts Center in front of a live audience. It's an hour of talk and debate about the issues that Sarasota is talking about. This is Talk of the Town.
As one of the legislative priorities for his final term, Governor Ron DeSantis has proposed the elimination of property taxes in Florida, saying they amount to homeowners having to pay rent and claiming local governments are being wasteful of taxpayer money. How might such cuts impact local government services? Who would such cuts help and who would they hurt? What proposals are currently making their way through the Florida House? And how are local officials preparing for the potential seismic ramifications? We'll find out today on WSLR's Talk of the Town. Good morning and welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm your host, Carrie Seidman, and we're coming to you from the Fogartyville Community Media and Arts Center in front of a live audience. Thanks to those of you who are here in the room, as well as those who are listening on the radio and watching for the first time on our first Facebook live stream. By now, pretty much everyone has heard about the governor's proposal, but no one, including the powers that be in Tallahassee, has been able to provide much clarity or details on what that plan would look like and how local governments would make up for the financial hit. As my own knowledge of property taxes is limited to paying my taxes, I'm fortunate to have with me today 3 guests who have much more knowledge about local government functions and just what our property taxes pay for. I'll be attempting to entice them to share just what they think of this idea of eliminating them. First, I'd like to welcome a man who I believe has tried to retire several times, but keeps getting pulled back into public service. Dave Bullock has more than 30 years as Longboat Keys Town Manager, Sarasota County's Deputy County Administrator, and CEO of Sarasota County's Economic Development Corporation. Last May, he was unanimously selected as Sarasota's interim city manager as the City Commission continues its long search for a replacement for former city manager Marlon Brown. I appreciate you being here, Dave.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and maybe try to enlighten on this topic. We'll see.
Yes, I'm sure you can, much more than I can, so I'm going to be relying heavily on you. Also with us today is Longboat Key Mayor Ken Schneier. Ken practiced law in New Jersey before serving as general counsel and subsequently president for a distressed debt securities firm in New York City. He retired after 13 years with Bank of America in 2009 and moved to Longboat Key, where he has served for the past 7 years on the town commission and the past 5 years as mayor. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Carrie. It's very nice to be here, and I hope everyone is applauding at the end of the program.
You and me both, Ken. And because after weeks of attempting, I was unable to get anyone from the governor's staff nor any of our state legislators to agree to participate in this discussion. I really did try. My goal here with these Talk of the Town sessions is to have perspectives from all angles, but I'll admit it's getting challenging to get a diverse group of panelists. But I'm very grateful to have instead journalist Marc Masferrer, who stepped in on short notice. He has spent nearly 2 decades covering and chronicling life in Manatee County, mostly as an editor at the Bradenton Herald, where he steered coverage of major events and upheavals in local government. Today, he continues that coverage as the creator of the award-winning Bradenton Journal on Substack, where he reports and comments on politics and public policy and their effects on the local community. Thank you for being here, Marc.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm happy to be here. I'm pretty sure that after this, I will not be working for the governor either, so.
You and me both also. To start off, I'd just like to get a little bit of clarity on how much of our local government budgets are derived from property taxes and just exactly what they pay for. I think we all know the obvious things like public schools and our law enforcement services, but what else do they cover, and how much of our total local taxes are made up with property taxes? So, Dave, I'm going to let you take that one to start.
Sure, thank you. So property taxes are one revenue source that local governments use to fund their services to their citizens. In the city's case, in the city of Sarasota's case, excuse me, property taxes generate about $57 million a year. That money goes into what we call our general fund, and the general fund pays for much of what you see and interact with in a city. So, for example, it pays for all the police. In fact, the police cost just a little bit more than we collect in property taxes. It pays for parks and recreation. It pays for street maintenance. It pays for, if you think it pays for your city commissioners. It pays for your city manager. It pays for all of the services that the city runs on. So it's information technology, it's human resource services, it's finance services. So all of those things that you think of when you think of the city generally are covered in the general fund. It does not pay for your water and sewer bill, your garbage collection bill, your parking bill or ticket. Those are special revenues that are fees for service. But when you interact with the city, it's a pretty sure thing you're interacting with someone who is supported by the general fund, and about half of our general fund is generated by property taxes.
And does it also include our court systems?
Well, so this is for the city. On the county side, property taxes pay for much the same things. General county government pays for their parks, their libraries, pays for the sheriff, pays for the courts. It pays for a whole family of services that the county provides. So if you would just call the county number for help, you would be talking to someone and they would refer you to someone else. It's a high likelihood that they're paid by the general fund, at least in part by property taxes. It is the primary financial supporting structure of local government.
And Ken, I'm going to ask you, I got some clarity myself before we started about the difference between a town and a city, because Longboat is a town, Sarasota is a city, and in this case, I guess there isn't a lot of difference in terms of their form of government. though Ken pointed out that Longboat has two counties to speak to, Sarasota and Manatee. So Ken, why don't you share for us how property taxes work on Longboat Key?
Well, so we do, the dividing line is right in the middle of the key between Manatee County and Sarasota. It was a continuation when Sarasota County was formed of basically University Parkway, and they just cut straight across there. So we have a separate property tax collector and appraiser. We have a separate supervisor of election for both part. It's a little bit more complicated for us than for others. Structurally, we're very similar to the city of Sarasota, and everything that Dave just said applies to us. We have a general fund that for this year is roughly a $25 million budget. 75% of that, in the case of Longboat Key, is paid for by ad valorem property taxes, what we're talking about in this. So roughly $18 million out of our $24 million budget comes from that source. If it were eliminated, we would be $18 million in the hole, which would be devastating. I just wanted to say one more thing to clarify, because if you look at your property tax bill when you get it, it isn't the simplest thing to understand, and it separates into a number of different things. About half of your bill will represent school taxes, which are really outside of this discussion at all. No one is looking, the governor or the legislature, to reduce school taxes. And then you have a variety of other things. I know in Sarasota, about 10% of it goes to the hospital, Sarasota Memorial Hospital. You go to the Mosquito Control Commission, and only when you get to the end do you have what is the ad valorem portion that goes to your community, to your town, Sarasota or Longboat Key. In the case of Longboat Key, our millage is 1.96 out of a total of something like 12 in your whole budget. And Sarasota City is very similar to that. County's larger. So it is a complicated, but we're just talking about, I think, the budget for the community portion.
Part of the problem with discussing this whole topic is that what has been proposed by the governor is very undefined. There have been very few details. He's very determined to eliminate property taxes completely for non-homesteaded properties. And he has, at least thus far, declined to create any kind of a commission or group to study the impacts of eliminating taxes and potential alternatives to coming up with other revenue streams. An analysis by the Florida Policy Institute found that real property taxes, which include all real estate, account for about 18% of county revenue, 18% of county revenue, 17% of municipal revenue, and 50 to 60% of school district revenue, which, as Ken mentioned, is being exempted from this proposal. But they estimated that for local governments to maintain the current level of public services, policymakers would need to raise $43 billion, that's with a B, dollars. Marc, I'm going to turn to you to kind of talk a little bit about where things are at with this proposal. I know there are some multiple proposals kind of working themselves through the House to get ready for the legislature in January. Can you kind of tell us where things stand at this point?
Sure. Well, the governor started this by coming out and saying he wanted to do away with property taxes, period. He didn't offer any specific ideas or proposals that he wanted the legislature to consider. He just left it up to the legislature, which between the House and the Senate, there's been varying levels of public interest in doing this. The Senate really hasn't done anything yet. In the House, and this is where it gets kind of confusing, has already come up with at least 8 different proposals to implement some version of what the governor is talking about. And immediately the governor came out and said, I don't like this. We can't put 8 things on the ballot. That's confusing to the voters, and regardless, none of these proposals go as far as I want to go. He talks about eliminating property taxes, period. In terms of what the House is what, made its, different levels of progress throughout the House are proposals to raise the exemption for property, homestead exemption amounts. I think most people now pay like $50,000 on the first $50,000 of their house. They don't pay any taxes on that. There's talk about increasing that amount, increasing it by year, but more and more to the point where then you wouldn't pay any homestead exemption, property taxes. But again, it's very early in the process. And like I said, the Senate hasn't done anything yet. The Senate president has kind of taken a wait-and-see approach to this. He doesn't seem too excited about doing this next year. And again, the governor the governor hasn't offered any guidance in terms of what would be acceptable to him. And then, so it's very early in the legislative process. And then once it's approved by the legislature, then it would go on the ballot for next November, and then voters would get to decide the fate of this. It would require 60% of voters to say yes. And again, the governor has not offered any guidance on this. I want to remind you that this is his last session, or he's in legacy building mode. He's in preparing maybe for the next election he runs in. So those are important things to remember as well.
And can you just talk a little bit about what the process would be if they get a bill? So it goes from the House, then it has to be.
Well, it would have to be approved by both houses of the legislature. When you're talking about amending the Constitution, you have to figure out the language, and I'm sure that would be part of the legislative process, figuring out the language. Because there's requirements about the way the language works on ballot on constitutional amendments and initiatives and that sort of thing.
And that has to be approved.
Ultimately, I think it has to be approved by the Supreme Court. The wording
Right.
has to be, because there's, often there are challenges because of the wording. You're supposed to have like single purpose. And a lot of times they see, that's trying to do two or three different things. You can only do one thing. So the Supreme Court would have the final say on that before it goes on the ballot. And then the voters would vote.
So given the vagueness of where we're at right now, Dave and Ken, let me ask you, as leaders in your local government, overlooking your budgets, are you panicking? Are you strategizing? Are you waiting and seeing? What's your MO at this point? Ken?
Carrie, if you don't mind, I'd like to give a little bit of perspective on all of this discussion,
Please
at least
do,
from
yeah.
our standpoint. So there is a provision in the Florida Constitution which calls us a home rule state, which generally means that decisions should be made at the local level if possible. A lot of approval should come from that point. And interestingly, from a Republican standpoint, we know we have a Republican governor and legislature. Normally, the point of view of that party is that government closest to the people is best. Having said that, there has been a multi-year, if not multi-decade, campaign in Tallahassee to preempt local government authorities, take things back in terms of zoning and planning and hotel houses and a lot of things you read about, and every year there's more of this. And there already is a bill in the legislature this year now to eliminate the local business tax, which is not a major revenue raise, but no one in the business community is asked to do that. This is the latest and most ambitious attack on local government that we've seen, and it is more ambitious than any that we've had before. And the one other thing I would add, just as background, is there isn't a proper, in my view, there isn't a property tax crisis. We work closely with the Florida League of Cities, as does Sarasota City. They do a lot of lobbying. They do a lot of preparation they do a lot of research on this area, and they talk to the government quite a bit about it. But we do have a local workforce affordability crisis. We have an insurance crisis. Everyone talks to us as local leaders about this. No one has asked us to eliminate property taxes. We do a survey every year, as does Sarasota, And it's not on the list of things that are necessary to do. Other things take a lot more priority. And if you came from a state like I did, New Jersey, we had like a 2/3 saving in our property taxes when we moved here. Not true of every state. But that's sort of the background of what we're facing here. It's not just this issue. It's the issue of whether people at the local level, county or municipal, should be dictating what goes on in our lives. And if we did have elimination of property taxes or a big reduction, any of the money that would be raised to replace it, and there is no plan, by the way, but if you wanted to replace those funds, it would be by a sales tax or the like. It would go to Tallahassee, and then you would have to go on bended knee as a county or a municipality to Tallahassee to get that money back that you're already receiving and using. So sorry for taking that, but it sort of gives the perspective of what we're facing.
I'm so glad you laid that out. And Ken also mentioned the Florida League of Cities, which has already prepared for, I think, every city in the state what the impact of these cuts would be and how each particular city's property taxes are divided up. So if you want a little bit more information, go to the Florida League of Cities website, and you'll be able to look up exactly what the situation is in your own area. You're listening to Talk of the Town on WSLR. I'm your host, Carrie Seidman, and I'm speaking with interim Sarasota City Manager Dave Bullock, Longboat Key Mayor Ken Schneier, and journalist Marc Masferrer. And Dave, I think I was about to turn it to you and say, what, as Sarasota's interim manager, other than probably praying that they come up with a city manager pretty soon so that you don't have to deal with any of this, what are you doing at this point about this proposal, if anything?
Well, thank you, Carrie. Just a couple comments. Ken summarized the situation pretty well. In Florida, I believe there's two sets of beliefs. At local government, it's believed that the government closest to the people is the one most accountable. You can throw your city commissioners or your town commissioners out if you don't like them. And then there's the state perspective, which is the state knows best. And you should rely on the government in the state that's the furthest from the people. As my editorial comment, it doesn't necessarily represent the thoughts of the city of Sarasota. However,
one thing Dave mentioned was that he has no interest in pursuing the city manager job permanently, which does allow him a bit more freedom in expressing himself today.
My next retirement will be my last retirement. So, however, this notion is a concept without a plan. And so, if you allow yourself, you can be drawn into a huge amount of time and energy trying to figure what would we do if this happened, that happened. As you heard, there are 8 bills introduced in the House. One of those has moved to the floor, so that means it's been through all of its required committees. 7 are still working their way through, and they're all different. They take different approaches, they have different objectives to them, and the Senate has 0 bills introduced. So someone once told me many, many years ago that, I hope there's no legislators here, that when the Florida legislature, let me reverse it, no man, woman, child, or animal are safe as long as the Florida legislature is in session. So just a little humor if there's any out here. So I'm very careful in dedicating a huge amount of resources at this stage in the game, trying to come up with what would we do if, until we move a little further into the process to see. There is not, in my opinion, there is not a single mind. You had the governor with his concept without a plan, eliminate property taxes. By the way, it's a great platform for a future presidential campaign. But again, that's me talking. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of resources. We're looking at it. We'll quantify the things that appear to be moving, but we're still a few months away. The legislature is going to meet up until March, and by that time, it would not surprise me, by the way, if This requires a special session. Florida loves to do special sessions. So we may have a special session before it actually has form and substance. And at some point in the process, there will be a recognition that we are dealing with a concept and now we need a plan to support it. And our legislators are actually smarter individually, I believe, than the whole. So, but it will happen. And especially here, we're pretty smart people involved for years and years and understand all this stuff. And they're reacting to a concept without a plan. So we'll look at it. We'll continue to analyze what are our options as we get further into it, and begin to put real scenarios out so the community understands what it means once we know what it is.
Yeah, exactly. I read something the other day that former State Senator Jeff Brandes, who now had something called the Florida Policy Project, his quote was, "This is a great bumper sticker, but not a great policy." So in the event that this does happen, you're going to have to make up for some of those revenues somehow. And there are limited ways to do that. And the most obvious one, I guess, being sales tax. But we were discussing before the show started about sales tax rates. The local government is very limited in what they can set as far as sales tax. Is that right, Dave?
Right. So all sales tax within local government's authority resides in state statute. So, and in many cases, you have to do a referendum. Many of you voted on something called the infrastructure sales tax, the penny tax, and the Sarasota County has been very supportive of the penny tax. Every municipality, all the unincorporated county has supported the penny tax for years, for decades, and it is all dedicated to infrastructure. Well, the authority to do that is granted to local governments by state law. So if there was a notion that local government would need to increase sales tax to make up for the loss of property tax, that would require statute. That would require state legislation to authorize us to do that. We have no independent authorization to just raise sales tax. That does not exist in Florida. And by the way, the shift from property tax to sales tax has a disproportionate impact on the lower income folks because they pay a larger and larger portion of their salary and wages just for consumables, just for the things they need to live, which are taxed. The concept of property tax was it's actually taxing your wealth. In many cases, people's wealth is largely defined by their home, by what they own. And the more expensive the home, the more they paid. And the theory was they had the ability to pay more than a person living in a $100,000 home versus someone living in a $5 million home. And that notion gets reversed when you move it from property tax to sales tax.
Marc, yeah, you might want to comment a little, because we were talking about this earlier as well, about how regressive Florida's tax system is to begin with. I know according to a study I read by the Institute for Tax and Economic Policy or something like that, Florida ranks #1 at having the most regressive tax system. We're #1?
Yeah, that's right. We're already set up to have a very regressive system where, the lowest fifth of, if you're in the lowest fifth in terms of income, you pay 13.2% of taxes, and the top fifth pay only like 4.5% of taxes. So there's already those disparities, and as he was talking about the effect that it would have if you reduce the taxes on the for the homesteaded properties, you're dealing with a math problem. How are we going to make up the revenue? And the way you do that, the only way that Florida can do it, because we don't have an income tax, is by increasing the sales tax. And so then when most people who who, those folks towards the bottom end, a lot of them, most of them, don't own property. So they're not going to enjoy the benefits of any homestead tax, but then they would be the ones hit hardest by increases in the sales tax.
And not only by increases in the sales tax, but because non-homesteaded properties would still pay property taxes, then you're talking about landlords who will probably pass those costs on to
And
their
businesses.
tenants and businesses, right?
And you do have, within the current property tax system, there are a lot of progressive elements already built in. For instance, the larger burden is borne by non-homesteaded property owners. So as Marc was saying, if you have a lower priced home, you're going to pay less, obviously, than a higher price. But the higher priced home, who is a non-resident, often has another home somewhere else. So he doesn't have a big house here, not only here, but he's got another big house or 3 or 4 big houses somewhere else.
And another possible consequence that's been talked about is, okay, so you lower the property taxes, and then some of these legislative proposals would then also preserve the Save Our Homes benefit that you get there, where you can transfer the savings, when you buy a new house, and the effect of all of that is that it would drive up the price of real estate, because all of a sudden, you have an incentive to sell your property, and that creates the competition. That would drive up the cost of housing, which then adds to the housing affordability problem that we have in this area. And so there's a lot of those consequences that either haven't been thought about, haven't been talked about, but they're out there. So it's not as simple as the governor would want it to make it sound like.
Carrie, if I may put in a word here for the businesses in the community, because they pay full freight. There is no homesteading for a property that a business owns. So certainly landlords, have a role in this. But just small businesses who own property, if this fundamental change in the way Florida funds local government goes into effect, it's almost inevitable that those business owners are going to pay more property tax because they're not protected in any way in any of the proposals that are at least been introduced into the House. They will probably pay more and more property tax. And after a while, there's a fairness issue you have to deal with here. We love our homestead exemption, but those businesses are important to the economy and the health of every local community. So, that has to be looked at or thought about in some manner.
And if you increase sales taxes to compensate, that's going to have a negative effect on businesses as well.
The governor, at least from my understanding, ostensibly said his reasoning behind this is to make housing more affordable, particularly for first-time home buyers. Is it really going to do that? I know when you, maybe you can explain how when you purchase a property, then the assessment goes to the new assessment. So if it was a homesteaded property, it will go to the full value assessment. Dave?
That's correct. So if you've been homesteaded for 30 years and your taxes have been held down by Save Our Homes, and then you sell it, the new buyer pays the full assessment. But I'd make a suggestion on trying to help the cost of home ownership. How about you take on the insurance lobby? Can we give that a run instead of? No one ever applauds in government, so thank you. But it seems to me that, as someone who pays insurance on a couple homes, it's nuts, and it grows an incredible amount, and you have no real influence over it. And we always have let's have an insurance special session. And the only thing I know that comes out of it is I pay more insurance. And
right.
So if we were able to deal with, and insurance is hard in Florida. I mean, we all, probably many in this audience, had significant insurance claims this past year. It's hard, but I'm not sure that the insurance industry is getting an intelligent review and look, not when you can just throw a concept out. We're going to help home ownership by eliminating property tax. And so now this is like, in my opinion, this is like you have a whole group of dogs in your yard and you throw one chunk of meat, and what happens to the dogs? They forget they're hungry. They just go crazy for one chunk of meat. So I think this is a simplistic way to try to move all attention to an invented solution to a problem that may or may not exist.
And part of the context that we're working in is, one way of looking at this attack on property taxes, going after property taxes, is that there's been in the last couple of years, the state government taking a really hard look at what's going on at local government. In Manatee County, they were doged. They were brought in and reports came out they came out with really broad allegations about wasteful spending and other things going on in county government. No specifics have been offered, but and there's some things going on politically in Manatee County that the governor didn't like. So there's some of that, but it's because it's important to note that the governor hasn't talked about how do local governments make up the lost revenue from property taxes. He doesn't care about that. He would probably want all local governments to, there's waste everywhere, he would say. And it's, so he's not going to be in a hurry to help them out, I would think. And undoubtedly there's efficiencies that can be found in government, all the time. But I think it's important. You can't just look at the property tax thing in isolation. I mean, there's been a tendency, and we've seen it a lot in Manatee County. The city of Holmes Beach didn't want the county to build a parking garage, so they went. The county went to Tallahassee, and they got that authority. Now the politics have changed. We had an election where the people who were supporting the parking garage got voted out, but we can't look at this in isolation because, like I said, home rule is it's a nice. Everybody says it. Everybody says they believe in it, but the way it's applied here in Florida is becoming less and less of a thing.
And Carrie, if I could spend a minute on the other side of the equation, which is, everyone says it should be easy to reduce expenses on the local level, but it's challenging. So in Longboat Key, we ended up roughly flat. We had a little bit higher revenue this past year, but property values went down, and we had one big new citizen, which is the St. Regis Resort, and as a result, we ended up with a little bit more money than we did last year. But it was eaten up, the excess, by increased costs. I mean, you have increased costs. We have increased costs. We have union contracts with our fire and our police, which have mandatory escalators every year. They're cost of living, but they're fixed, 3 to 4% per year. And that's on a $14 million expense we have for those services. So it's very difficult to find the money that you're going to eliminate. Insurance costs, do you have them going up? We have them going up. So it's not just a question of cutting. It's a question of, we have the needs increase each year. They don't go down. So we'd have to cut, and then we'd have to eliminate whatever upsides we were facing each year as well.
Go ahead, Dave, because I was going to ask you, do you feel like Sarasota city government is bloated?
So let me say that I've never run into a government that couldn't do it better. There are opportunities in any government I've ever been around to make improvements. And it takes a level of discipline and commitment from the elected officials all the way through the organization to do it. Governments tend to want to keep doing what they do. Bureaucracies love to just do what they do and shed, any risk that they can. So are there opportunities? There are opportunities. One of the good things out of this discussion, I think, will be a little bit of self-reflection on the part of local government, is where can you make improvements? Where can you reduce cost? What services are you giving that may or may not have a large enough benefit to justify their expense? Every local government I've ever been around loves to address whatever squeaky wheel is squeaking. And sometimes you have to ask, does that squeak warrant the allocation of public resources to make it quiet or not? And that is a really hard question for local government to answer, because the squeaky wheel is sitting right in front of them. And I don't mean that in a derogatory term. I just mean people want more and more stuff. And at some point, there's got to be do we spend money to address is it a big enough issue to put the public money into it? Does it benefit enough people to do it? It's really hard for local government to do it. But one of the positive outcomes may be an effort to improve local government. Some of you have been around, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a better government movement, and it did have some positive impacts. I'd say we're due for another one that tries to look more carefully at costs.
Ken, as someone who came from a financial background, we were talking briefly about bond ratings and the impact that this might have on a municipality's ability to borrow money. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, when we were talking before we started here, there was one thing that I didn't mention. I've seen a report out there that is beginning to discuss not only what happens with municipal and county bond ratings, but at the state. We have a tremendous amount of state debt, and the effect of making the fisc a little more unwieldy could affect the state bond levels and state debt as well. But you know, on Longboat Key, we've had a AA+ rating. We do go into the markets for some projects. But if you suddenly have a dramatic reduction in your revenues, like with a company, your bond rating is going to go down. It has to, because you won't be able to cover. The first thing they look at is the ability to cover your interest, and then if there are principal payments, you have to be able to do that, and you want to have a multiple of that to get a good rating. If you go down and you're covering it 2 times, you're covering it 1.5 times, your rating's going to go down, and then your costs are going to go up, which is the effect of a lower rating, is you pay more for debt. So sure.
If I can add one more thing.
Sure.
Many cities and counties have property taxes pledged to debt. In fact, under Florida law, you have to identify the millage that is pledged to debt. So that's a contract that every city and county has made with the bondholders that guarantees they'll set the property tax millage at whatever is required to pay the principal and interest. That's a non-negotiable contract. So a concept without a plan is eventually going to have to deal with those types of things.
What happens in that case if you're already, contractually committed to?
I'm going to go out on a limb here.
Okay.
I think
Good.
our legislators actually are smart enough to know that, and they have shown that in the past when they looked at changing taxes, recognizing that you have to protect that contract, which is enforceable against every city and county I know has some level of ad valorem debt. And I think when it really comes to it, they will protect that, because the risks to the state that'd be nuts, and I don't believe they'll go there, but those will have to be protected in some form or fashion. By the way, the debt shows general fund debt or ad valorem debt shows up on your property tax statement. So you can see it, and it is, as I say, a contract between the local government and the bondholders.
So it's been asked why there isn't a commission or whatever looking at property taxes sort of more holistically and other options to reducing property taxes. Are there other ways of dealing with property taxes that could keep taxes lower, or that could keep things more equitable in terms of who the burden falls on? Anybody want to try that?
Dave alluded to this before, but there is no commission that is doing this. The legislature, I believe, passed a bill last year in the legislature to set up a commission because the governor had already made the pronouncement about eliminating the taxes. And I think they were putting $1 million into that commission to study, and it was vetoed. So there was an opportunity to have.
It was vetoed
sort of
by the governor?
By the governor, yes.
Yeah.
He decided this was not a good idea. Now there are other ways to address this, and I'll say from our standpoint, there are a lot of communities that do not have their own fire and their own police departments. We do that. the movement with these bills that are in the legislature, at least now, are to exempt fire and police from the effect. Now, that doesn't mean that our reduction would be lower. It means that we could not eliminate fire and police, so the impact of a reduction would apply to everything else but them, and make it much more dramatic. There are ways that you can move your police or fire or other elements of your government into a separate entity, and a lot of, I would call it finagling to try to figure out other ways to make the money go further and take it out of the general budget and what have you. But that's why. I mean, why have to go through that process?
It's important to note what wouldn't get that kind of protection. Your libraries, your parks, your street maintenance, things that you think of local government providing. And it will be interesting to see if this does end up on the ballot next year, how that point of view is presented, what that campaign looks like. But the odds are, if something's on the ballot, it's going to get approved. The question is, okay, what are the consequences of that? How will that affect government services that people have come to rely on? You think about what we've been through in this area with the hurricanes. I mean, if you had less property taxes to try to address that, then the crisis would have been even bigger than it was. And the other side of it is and that still hasn't been presented fully, is exactly how much people will save. I mean, it's because when you start doing the math, how much will you really save by not, by increasing the exemption on your property tax? And, it could be kind of complicated trying to explain that to people. So I think those are things that, again, they haven't been, what exactly that would look like hasn't been decided, hasn't been developed yet. But those are important things to, as we go forward, to look out for and to raise questions about.
Yeah, absolutely. You're listening to Talk of the Town on WSLR 96.5 FM, and we've been discussing the proposal to eliminate property taxes in Florida and the ramifications it would have on local governments. And my news director keeps handing me more and more questions from the audience, and we're limited with time here, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to our audience questions and try to do as many of them as I can. I know we won't get to all of them, but maybe we can coerce our guests into staying a little bit after the show if you didn't get your question answered. But here's the first one, and this is directed to Dave. At the beginning of the city's budget workshops last summer, you talked about how the city had dipped deeply into its reserves over the last 4 years, while also lowering its revenue with millage reductions. You said that combined with the storms last year, that depleted the city's reserve funds. How would the proposed changes to property taxes impact your plan to get back to policy-driven fund balance targets?
Wow, there's a government weenie somewhere in this audience
It's a plant.
who pays a lot of attention. So, and this is useful, and it speaks to what Marc just mentioned. We were carrying a reserve of somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million for several years. The city had been spending it down a little bit, and you might say to yourself, what on earth do you need $30 million for? Well, and the answers are in 3 words: Debbie, Helene, and Milton. So we spent that money down in a matter of months to help pick up debris, storm debris, to help just clear the streets. And we ran through somewhere north of $20 million just in response. And we haven't even rebuilt yet, just in response. So where did that money come from? It largely came from property tax. And I'm a low tax guy. And for the first time in my life, I recommended to the city commission that they impose a modest increase for a 3-year period to recover our reserves, because we had spent them down to less than 14% of our operating costs. And for a coastal community exposed to storms, that is not enough. Experience has told us that for decades. And the commission did it. They were not all, necessarily, no one was happy, but it will allow us to rebuild our reserves. take that option away, and how do you rebuild reserves? You know, what do you do? That's going to, and by the way, throw in there that FEMA may or may not exist in a meaningful way at the federal level. So what tools do we have to do those reserves? Because here's one thing you can be clear in. When there is a disaster, people expect their local government to perform. They may be interested in the federal government, they may be interested in the state government, but by golly, they want to see the emergencies dealt with, the search and rescues dealt with, the local fire and police, the streets being cleaned, the sand being removed, and the destroyed parks and infrastructure being cleaned up. And that doesn't happen from the federal government. That happens at the local level. One of the lessons I learned in my career, which I hold dear, is in September 11th, when the Pentagon was hit, right? Now you're saying, how does this affect local? When the Pentagon was hit, the most powerful piece of real estate on earth, who did they call? They called Arlington County. They called the city of Alexandria 911. And that's who they looked for immediate help. And that's who citizens look for when there's a disaster. So if you inhibit our ability to do the fundamental health, safety, and welfare service, what kind of a, where's the thinking in that? Sorry, apologize for that.
Absolutely. Great point. Thank you.
So I don't know about the rest of you, but I would like to see Dave run for higher office.
I think we'd all like that, but he was quite adamant when I asked him about it, that this was it. I have another question. And we've got some really smart people in the audience. I'm not sure I understand half the questions, but this one is on progressive mill rates. Can we tier the mill rates so that houses over a million, say, pay a higher rate, or how could we make assessments more accurate?
It's up to the state. When a city or county sets a millage rate, that's the tax rate. They set it for everyone. The state has provided the only exceptions that are allowed for that. The state has provided through homestead, exemptions and veterans exemptions and things like that. But we don't have the ability to do at the local level staggered millage rates. That would have to come from a statute.
And the progressive element in that is based on the home value. So, if you're paying X percent, whatever the millage rate is on a $100,000 home, you're basically paying 10% of what $1 million homeowner is paying already. So, it would add to that, but as Dave said, it would need to be approved by the state.
Are there any other methods to make it more equitable, to make it so the upper tiers income earners pay more percentage-wise than the lower income?
Well, keep in mind that the upper tier owners who are not full-time residents, they don't have homestead protection.
Right.
So they're paying the full load. And Longboat Key is a great example. Ken, unless it's changed, I think actually slightly the majority of the units are not homesteaded. It's close to 50-50.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's at least.
So that means
50% or
they're
not.
paying full freight for
Right.
a $5 million condo,
Right.
or a $10 million home if they don't live here and are homesteaded. And I will say this, the property appraisers in both counties are really diligent about homestead exemption and making sure there's not fraud there.
Yeah, and in terms of escalation, there's a 3% limit for homestead properties of how much your bill can increase each year. And if it ever goes down, you start from that lower level as well. For non-homesteaded properties, there's a 10% limit. So they, whenever there's an escalation, they're paying more as well.
All right, our next question. This one's a little wonky, too. If property taxes are eliminated or reduced, will this impact the city's CRA and TIF funds? And CRA is Community Redevelopment Area, and TIF is the tax increment financing, such as being used for the, proposed to be used for the Sarasota Performing Arts Center. Will it affect those?
Yes. They're all based on property tax. So So we have a community redevelopment agency in Newtown, and as the tax base grows, all of that growth goes towards projects only in Newtown. We have a CRA or a district in downtown, includes the Quay, some of the Rosemary district, the new park, and so on. That money goes to improvements in that district in the park. So those are two areas that the city has. They're all property tax based. So if, you know, whatever the deal is, it comes out, unless it specifically protects community redevelopment agencies or TIF, tax increment financing. That's what TIF stands for. It's a way to say there's an area of the city where any growth in value, the taxes derived from that, stays within that district. So unless it's accounted for, anything that affects our millage rates, our property taxes would affect those districts as well.
So if property taxes were eliminated, does this doom the Sarasota Performing Arts Center, the new?
Well, if property taxes are eliminated, that will be the least of our concerns, I think.
Good point. All right, I think we have time for one or two more. Has the governor provided a rationale for eliminating property taxes? Anybody? Mark?
He's talked about the idea, you know, kind of the philosophical notion that we as homestead or as a homeowner, that who, especially if you've paid off your house, that you're essentially paying rent to the government, and that the government is your landlord, and that property taxes amounts to rent. And the fallacy with that, or the counter to that, is you're actually getting something in return for what you're paying, and he doesn't acknowledge that. You're getting all these services that we've talked about. You know, you're getting your law enforcement, you're getting your libraries, your parks, and so, you know, it's not just, you're not just being asked to write a check and throw your money away. You're getting something in return. That, I would argue, the more of those services that you have, the higher quality that those services are allowed to be, then that's good for your property owners. That's good for your community, and so the value of the property in that community, theoretically at least, would be higher as well. So if you eliminate that revenue source, then it becomes a lot harder for the community to maintain the level of services that, frankly, you know, we've come to expect. Because we may not like paying taxes, but there are things that we come to expect. You know, we want the 911 call to be answered and the deputy to respond, you know, 5 minutes ago if you need them, and so it's not rent. You're getting something in return.
Yeah, and I'm a little personal editorial here. I honestly do not mind paying my property taxes. I think they're very reasonable, and I feel like it's part of my duty as a citizen of this community to do that. So unfortunately, we're running out of time. I know there are a lot of other questions on this topic, but keep your eyes open as the legislature opens in January, and we'll see whether this becomes a reality or it just dies a natural death. I want to thank my wonderful guests today. Please give them a round of applause. Talk of the Town takes place on the second Saturday of each month, and always in front of a live audience here, which is the fun place to be for the show. If you can't be with us or you miss a program, you can always find them on the WSLR website in the archives, on any podcast platform, or on WSLR's YouTube channel. We'll be back on January 10th, and I'm not sure what the Talk of the Town will be at that point, but it will be just before the legislature convenes, so I'm sure there'll be plenty to discuss. But before we finish, as is our tradition, we are going to turn to our guests one last time and ask them to contribute their prediction about what the upcoming headlines on this property tax proposal could be, whether they're factional, fictitious, sarcastic, hopeful, whatever. Dave?
So I will butcher an H.L. Mencken quote. For every complex problem, there is a solution that is simple, neat, and wrong.
Ken, how about you?
So for people who are familiar with Saturday Night Live, it's not a prediction, but it's a hope, is DeSantis says, never mind on property tax reform.
And Marc?
It's going to get on the ballot. Something's going to get on the ballot. So I think the headline will be, voters overwhelmingly okay property tax cuts. The savings may surprise them. I just think that that's the thing to look out for, is that at the end of the day, is to look closely at what the real savings might or might not be.
Yeah, be careful what you vote for. Thanks to the Gulf Coast Community Foundation for its support of Talk of the Town, to today's panelists, the WSLR staff, volunteers, donors, and all of our listeners. And thanks to all of you in today's audience and listening elsewhere for making Talk of the Town part of your weekend. I want to wish everyone a safe, peaceful, and happy holiday season filled with everything and everyone you love. And until next month, this is your Talk of the Town host, Carrie Seidman, wishing you happy holidays, take care of each other, and carry on.